spoiler alert, if you haven't played the game yet, you may want to wait to listen to this. Enjoy. Hello, everybody. My name is John Wee, Community Manager at Santa Monica Studio. This is the art book commentary. We have an epic lineup for you guys. If you guys want to go around the room, say your names, titles.
I'm Rafael Grassetti, principal character artist in the project.
I'm Del Longfish. I'm the lead character concept artist.
I'm Nate Stevens, principal environment artist.
Hi, my name's Luke Berliner. I'm the lead environment concept artist.
John Pelamarchuk, principal environment artist.
And my name is Corey Barlog, and I'm just the vice principal. No, I'm director because I'm so funny.
So we're going to start here with the characters of God of War, starting with our titular character, Kratos. Could you guys talk a little bit about the inception of how the design came about, transitioning to the Norse design?
This took a long time to get to. Like, we know what Kratos looks like, but it was amazing how long it took to get to even just getting Kratos to look right at this higher resolution.
Yeah, I think early on we started to investigate a lot of even actors and how we're gonna run into scanning a person versus actually getting modeling in 3D. And we did that with Atreus, but with him, we started looking at a lot of the old games and his features and how, what do we translate to this new one? So like the early models are actually taking from God of War 3 models and trying to take it to the next gen. So we started just to sculpt a lot of the wrinkles and try to play up on the first playable.
Yeah, and I think something with Kratos too, early on, I think Jose kind of hit a look, Jose Cabrera, kind of with the beard and stuff. But then we were looking at kind of how the costume works, and we were looking at, do we want to go full Norse? And then what we had to kind of do is, the character has a great kind of history with him, so there's these iconic elements that we wanted to kind of show, so you can see where he's fully decked out, looks like a beast and all this stuff, which was a really nice direction. But what we also wanted to show is the tattoo and these things that are iconic, because we also came into this knowing that the blades wouldn't be part of this. So we wanted to leave those kind of hallmarks that we still showed with the character. So it was a lot of back and forth and a lot of collaboration on the 2D and 3D. We did a lot of that.
That big bear skin was really cool. I was a fan of that. It felt a little too Game of Thronesy, but it was really neat. It kind of was evocative, I think, of the sort of mythology of the new area. But I agree. I think we very quickly realized it's just covering up a lot. It's not really, I think, doing what it could do. So it was nice to see that we kind of evolved.
I think we selected 3, but in reality we did more than 40 of those sketches.
Well more.
Yeah, yeah. This one, like I said, it went on for a long time of really trying to figure it out. It's funny because you'd imagine that we spent, 7 or 8 games, like figuring out what this guy looks like, but it felt like we were starting from scratch, taking it to this level of fidelity, because it's so easy to make it look wrong.
And that's something I think, even realizing too, is like, even though we do have this established character, Kratos kind of means something a little unique to everyone else. The character's so good, kind of people own that design and who it is. So it was a lot of back and forth, but it was great.
Do you remember early on when it was like the small incubation group, it was pitched like he wouldn't even have abs. He would have like a pot belly.
Oh, yeah.
And stuff like
it was the athlete during the
handlebar
off
mustache.
season. We were saying like he was a pro athlete during the off season.
He has
That
the
was
abs
our
now, and
pitch.
that looks rad.
We had a version like that without the abs for a long time, yeah.
I remember too just seeing the progression of Kratos from God of War 3 to the proportions that we had now, and how we had to continue to kind of walk him away from that, because with the previous camera angle, his proportions were really pushed beyond what was normal for a human. And as we started to make the environments more realistic and do a much more cinematic camera, like, it really looked a little jarring in the beginning.
Yeah, someone actually made human style hands. Remember that?
Yeah.
They're actually the right size and they look little in the game. I was like, look at these little hands.
And the other thing I think with the costume and stuff that Corey had asked for from the beginning too is kind of with all of our cast and characters, is to make sure that you can kind of feel the hand of who made this, because we pick up where they're kind of subsistence living out in nature. And I think one thing you told us, Corey, was more the biker feel versus kind of the ornate pantheon that we'd seen in the previous games. So that was another kind of thing that we pulled on with the design.
Yeah, tough and makeshift. Though it did turn out that when you look at all this later stuff, the armors that are more ornate, having that feel of the Huldra brothers, like that's also really cool as
Yeah.
well. It feels awesome when you save up and purchase one of those
And-
later in the game.
And I think that's a nice thing. We get like the visual arc that kind of complements the narrative arc. So you get that more dramatic kind of change in there. And then also, like you were talking about the bear skin, that was also something we had talked about early on between Kratos and the son, Raph, with the...
Yeah, with the wolf and the bear.
Yeah.
And that changed a couple times back
Yeah,
and forth of
swap-
like
swapping.
who's gonna be what, just for readability in the game. Because when we start putting Kratos in black, we run into a lot of issues of a lot of stuff not showing
Yeah.
all the details and stuff. So we ended up changing a couple times.
Yeah, and that's one of those things we kind of always try to put the intent. And something that's great about working on this game is, I think, Corey, with your story background, the narrative, there's a lot of that put in all the characters. And like the bear idea was maybe he's a little more aggressive, more impulsive, where if the son's the wolf, he's a little more sly thinking.
Focusing on Atreus, what were some of the challenges of designing, Kratos' son?
I know one of the first things we talked about, I think half the studio wanted the kid to be yoked out, like a little bodybuilder, kind of being a Kratos' son, thinking he should be
Huh.
really massive. But I think Corey's intent was to do the opposite.
Like that little kid bodybuilder?
Yeah.
The tiny,
Little Hercules.
Yeah, I definitely was not too into that. I mean, honestly, the kids' look kind of came to light when we cast Sonny. Like for me, we kind of drew a bunch of stuff. You guys did the exploration where you kind of said, here's what Kratos looks like. Let's see what a 10-year-old version of
Yeah.
Kratos would look like. And we tried to kind of do all these different
Deconstruct
versions.
it.
And nothing really connected and nothing felt right. And it's really hard, I think, to draw kids, right? Like
Yeah.
there's so little detail going on that the uniqueness is so subtle, it's so small, right? And it's like what came from is casting Sonny, seeing his headshot and going like, man, that's the kid right
Yeah.
there, that's what he looks like. So
Yeah.
that was a really good find, I think, when we were able to get him.
And I think on the concept side, it was really nice talking about going against maybe what was expected, the idea that he's intentionally looks a little more meek. We wanted that to kind of play up his innocence with the world, because Kratos has a view of the gods and mythology that's he has one way, but we also wanted kind of this innocence and wonder to fill the world.
Yeah, you need that balance, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to end up like the Defenders where everybody's just punching somebody. And you're like, oh, wow, there's no difference, right? You look at the Avengers, it's like everybody has their part that they play. If the kid was big and strong, then it would be Kratos and tiny Kratos doing
Yeah,
the same
exactly.
thing. And it's really like each of them, as even in the game we say, like every god has their own sort of uniqueness,
Hmm.
right? And his uniqueness is vastly different from Kratos. It's just what he carries with him is the negative sides, right? Like
Yeah.
the bad traits of Kratos are part of his DNA.
I even remember one of the early, and maybe an internal playtest too, like we heard lightning in the background and the kid was like, oh, is that giants fighting? And just this really cool way of looking at the world where Kratos is a little
Oh,
more
yeah.
like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, I think for this character too, we could imagine him growing up and all the elements that we could add into his costume, like Kratos's touches and the mom's touches and all this stuff.
Mhm.
I think that helped bring all the visual to life.
Yeah, like he's got Kratos' red sash, and when you see the mom, she's wrapped in yellow, and he's got her kind of scarf around his neck, so he's kind of walking the line between both of them.
Yeah, it's this cool authenticity. I think it exists both within the creation of the worlds and the characters, is that feeling of even little details on these characters make things feel more authentic, more real. The
Yeah.
idea of wearing Kratos's, piece of Kratos's cloth really does feel like things were assembled with whatever was nearby, whatever was around. It tells the story of the world, but also kind of identifies who the character is rather than having this perfectly like made suit, right? It's kind of the early Spider-Man homemade suit versus the professionally made suit, right?
Even trying to mimic some of the stuff that he sees on Kratos, like the wrappings on the hands, even though like not knowing what those are, like start a little shoulder pad or stuff that mimics the designs on
Yeah.
both ways.
I don't think you can see it in these ones, but we have these tattoos in the game, and Atreus has one going up his arm. and we wanted that to kind of help him with shooting the bow. So we designed it so when he actually pulls the bow back, the tattoos in line, like that actually gives help to the arrows. So all those little areas we try and pay attention to.
Yeah, we didn't really think people would go that deep into trying to solve this. In like E3 2016, people were already solving
Yeah.
all the tattoos on his arm.
Yeah.
And it was like, what, like 2 weeks before we were going to go off E3, you said, these are gibberish. Should I change these? And I was like, yes, please. We need to make those actually say something.
That was a lot of the design. Same thing for the face, because you mentioned Sunny and casting him, but then bringing it to like doing characterization and bringing a lot of the story, like the scars on his face and a lot of the, growing up and being in a harsh universe. And
Yes, I like that we haven't answered the question of how he got the scar on his cheek, because there is a story that's going to go behind that, but I kind of want to wait for that story and use it in a later iteration of the game, but everybody keeps asking about that.
Yeah, that was all has intent behind it.
Yeah. I like too how you guys focused on like bringing some of the Greek stuff into the costuming, but also like he's sort of the bridge into the Norse costuming. So it's sort of that combination of his two homes.
Yeah, no, and that was even like between, like Ralph said, like the Kratos sash and the scarf from the mom. Like he literally is two halves of.
Yeah, and
of
it
those
was really fun too to play with all the upgrades and how he improves upon he's wearing, and add a little bit of that touch of the different creatures of the universe, and how do we bring that into the costuming. That was also really fun to play with.
Let's focus on Midgard. Really curious, how was this first described to you to begin with, and then translated both as an artwork and then finally in-game?
I think at the beginning of the project, there was a pretty big desire to make the game super realistic, and we had like a really big departure from what the previous God of War games were. And I think when you look at the Kratos designs, those first illustrations of him with the bear pelt, and then underneath it, the illustrations of him wearing much more mythological armor, is kind of a good example of how this game progressed visually. So I think Midgard's sort of this palette cleanser. It's much more the world that you know. It still has a lot of mythology and mystery built into it, but it's supposed to be relatable. So when you go to the other realms, they're much more impressive.
And that was one thing too. I think we talked about, especially on that, is like if everything's at 10, nothing's at 10. So the contrast between like the realms and stuff.
It was also like this game is so big that, I mean, John, Nate, you guys had to make up a bunch of stuff. I mean, we couldn't draw everything.
Sure, I mean, and we didn't necessarily do our homework right at the beginning. I think there's actually a quote about this in the art book, that the first forest we made looked like a Sierra Nevada forest.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That was a hard thing.
The Pacific Northwest. Why does it look like that?
I'll blame that on myself. I grew up in Northern California in the woods. And so
honestly didn't.
that's
trying
what
to put your
I'm
house
the
in
most familiar with. So I think.
I mean, it looked cool, but one of our artists from Sweden, he's like, by the way, this is not right. The trees are supposed to be shorter. And so we made some changes, and there's the complaints that the forest wasn't Norse enough looking, so it really, the difference between what we ended up with, what we started with, was just the minimal amount of variety and foliage. Like the Norse forests are like very trees, moss, rocks. There's not a huge ton of variation like you see in like some of the
Also,
like
a lot of
Colorado or something.
The Scandinavian forests, they don't have a lot of underbrush, which doesn't really look great in a video game. It almost looks like you've not fully arted
Looks empty.
the level. Yeah.
This reminds me when we had a lot of snow too, and I think it definitely tapered down a little bit. Probably would have resulted in some environment player fatigue. So as you progress through Midgard,
There was definitely an
melt.
anti-snow campaign for a while.
Yeah.
I know that I was definitely into the snow, and at one point it's just all the snow seemed to get removed from the game. And I was like, what the fuck?
And that was part of it. It's not Norse enough when we finally realized, okay, Norse is snow
Right.
and fog.
Right.
And if you don't have
And
kind of
boat
those
prows.
two things, then
Yeah.
and boat prow.
Yeah.
And
And
these
runes.
Paintings
Visual
too were like around the time when we really, right before E3, and we were trying to nail down like what our art direction pillars were. And so all of us kind of constantly for like, was it 2 months? Locked ourselves in a room and constantly went over, and we had done so much prototypes from the first playable to different concepts to all this stuff. So we really needed to solidify. And I think I love the art direction pillars that we came up with. It's like mythical realism is like the overarching idea, with the So it's 3 ideas of the Norse historical detail, mythological,
Yeah, all the gods and the mythology, and legends and lore.
And then like the pre-digital color, so all the 80s movie influences.
Yeah.
And I think now we really have a awesome idea and a great direction that is uniquely our own.
And that was one thing I think, given that we also looked at in that, as we saw that too, is almost didn't want things to look too slick in the characters or the environment. We almost had this thing like, let's celebrate the imperfections of what it is, and just because it's not as slick
dirty and lived in, right? Like you want that feeling of like the world isn't the backlot at Universal Studios. It's interesting because we started out, I think, in a place that a lot of games start out, and perhaps even movie stuff, but it's easier to achieve this in movies, is that like barren, big monolithic structures to completely barren like landscapes and stuff like that, which looks fantastic in a piece of concept art, garbage when it comes to play because it's a giant empty space, right? And then what remained from that, what was kind of the stair step, was that giant monolithic structures kind of jutting out of these landscapes, right? And I think in the image down on the right has that sort of remnants of these things that are carved out of the mountain, but they still feel like there's some man-made nature to it, as well as sort of just regular nature. And I think that kind of connection, so it kind of felt like God of War has big, epic scale. And I think scale is always fight the big character. And it's nice to see in this one that we're like, we're really going to make this world a character. We're going to make objects in there feel like you're dwarfed by them, which I think is awesome.
Also, with forests in video games, they have a tendency to look kind of procedural. You get turned around. It's hard to tell. Like ours did not do that. We ended up banging on this long enough, and with like level design and stuff, that you can be dropped into any of the forests in the game, and you should be able to get your bearings fairly quickly.
Yep.
We redid
everyone
this
has a little bit of
personality.
like 6 times, dude.
Yeah, we did.
I feel like we've
also remade
everything in the game. We remake everything like 4 or 5 times.
I remember though being shocked, like just seeing all the like amazing 3D art and like Stefan and Dan and all the guys that were just making forest stuff and like running through and seeing the early stuff, and then eventually like all the amount of dead undergrowth and just detail that you guys added. As like I had not seen that level of like representation of a forest before. Usually it's just trees.
It's a God of War forest.
Yeah.
I mean, a forest is a forest, like you guys said. Like it's not supposed to be the 10, but this forest, in terms of other, other games, I feel like this one should be the new standard, hopefully, in terms of, readability and, cool level design. You don't get lost. You don't just head off in one direction. They're interesting. Like an interesting forest is hard to do.
So for Snowmason, I'm really curious to hear about your guys' I guess, process in building this. Did you build the story first, then the artwork, and then how did everything come together?
Oh, I think it was story first, right?
Yeah. I mean, this initial thing came from a story that was founded in the myth that I kind of expanded upon to help touch on the concepts of sort of family relationships. The idea of everything in this game is dealing with parents and their kids. And the previous games obviously dealt with the same thing, Titans and gods, and then gods and Kratos. Like everybody had that weird familiar relationships. And this is the same thing, kind of telling some stories of the giants. But I think, then handing it over to all the art guys and saying, good luck. And then they get to solve the problem of how are you going to make this giant character that is a level?
The funny thing is, you'd think the forest would be easy, and you would think this would be hard. But in our studio, since we've done so much stuff like this level went fairly smoothly. Even from level design,
that's true.
Like this, we knocked out where we struggled with forest for quite a bit. But this, we're like, oh yeah. Oh, now you're talking.
Right.
Giant dead guy on a frozen lake with.
I guess this is the thing we take for granted. Like, forest should be easy, and it really is. The things you think are easy are never easy.
Nate's saying that because this whole level is a character, and we had to build it.
It was very easy. We hit import.
Right. Yeah. We outsourced the character portion to the character guys.
It was very challenging just because of the size of this thing. And when, like Nate was saying, when level design was designing this, there was a lot of going so close to like the hand and things that, everything needs to be as high res as an environment, but we don't have the same tools or knowledge or having.
Yeah, you're seeing like the grooves on the palm, the tattoos there, the
crack climb,
beard moving around,
the wrinkles of his finger. Yeah,
I think too, like we really needed some big God of War set pieces in this game. I think for a long time it was so like realistic, and we were sort of missing some of those elements. So once we kind of got this in, the Caldera, some of the other realms, like it really started to feel like, okay, this is a God of War again.
Yeah, I think people I wanted people to focus on the things we hadn't done much of, because once we do the big thing, it feels like you just fall into the old patterns. So it was nice, like once people saw this come together. This was also fairly controversial in the ice, right? With the uneven ice.
Oh
And
yeah.
For the longest time, it was like, we have IK and we're going to be able to do all these moves on it. And so don't worry about the slopes and stuff like that. The number of fucking slope conversations and IK we've had over the duration of this project just to try to achieve that mild incline of the ice, man, that was insane.
Yeah, I mean, because the narrative was he fell down, his breath froze the lake, so it wouldn't be flat, it'd be wavy.
Right, it'd have a little wave that froze instantly.
So we built all the waves and then...
Which it looks awesome, and it's just like, we got to the end point and realized, okay, we're only going to be able to support a certain amount of the inclines. But I think because so many balls were in the air of all of the systems that nobody could give any definitive answers on anything. So early on, like on the next one, it's going to be very easy for people to go, this is what we can support because all the rules are established. But when everything is a variable that is unknown, boy, it's hard to get anybody to commit to anything.
I think this image helped a lot of people that were coming in early on in the studio to understand the new God of War, because when they saw this, it was like, okay, I get it. You guys are still making this massive thing, and
that's
awesome.
true.
It was one of the images that we always used to explain what the game was going to be.
Looking at Alfheim, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but curious was what came first, the character design or the location of Alfheim, or both in tandem?
The upper left-hand corner image, that right there, Jung?
I did that one, actually.
You did that one?
Yeah.
That one right there was the one that spoke most to me, that said like, I don't know what is about that, but the trees growing towards the central light source, like we had a high concept for it, but that was the one that felt like, wow, the characters started there, the environment started there, like that one really sort of presented. There was that one and another one where they were walking along the
and all the
beach.
pebbles. I was going to say, there's another one
so
that
those two, I think, were done
similar.
at the same time.
Yeah.
And it was back at Penn Station, I think.
Yeah.
Right when you guys were in the balcony thing, and I was like, man, that's interesting. Those images told a story, which I thought, okay, how do we replicate that?
I think there's literally nothing we can move forward in this studio without having like an intense amount of story and meaning behind it. And one of the things too is I think there's so much like backstory to this place that doesn't fully come through, but when you kind of explain it to people, it's like, so that idea of like the living and like sort of the souls coming and living underneath the lake, and that this place is supposed to be sort of supplying all the souls to all the realms of everyone that's born. And so that idea of like a single point of light or life that everything grows towards, and that even the trench has this lindworm which was collecting all the souls and carrying them to the temple. Like that's the motif that's running down. So
oh, the lindworm makes me so sad. That was another cut from the game where it was basically this worm that would travel from realm to realm, and when somebody died would sort of eat the soul of them and kind of carry it off, so that part of them would go to either Valhalla or Helheim, and then they would carry this back to the lake and deposit it in the lake. And we had this whole interaction with the giant lindworm. It was going to be amazing. And then sadly, the evil word of scope made me cut it out.
And then Luke, your idea was like all those trees, because this one really stuck out early on too, I think, to everyone. But they're all growing towards that central.
Yeah, so the one thing that makes this realm kind of unique is that there's just that one light point.
Yeah.
So everything for thousands of years has been training itself towards it. But I think later on we needed a bit of a state change. So having the dark elves there sort of like tinting everything red.
Mm-hmm.
So when you finally crack open the hive, you get like the pure white light that's supposed to be there.
But I like how that even kind of like evolved it. And you look at like Q4, it's almost like these trees are growing horizontal and everything. It's like super fantastic, but kind of beautiful at the same time.
Is this another one where it seems like it would be hard, but it was easy?
I mean, this whole level, which I think is, 2-3 hours of gameplay, was almost a full 4-year build. I mean, this was the first level that was designed and
Yeah, this
concept and
did
stuff.
go
So
on for a long time.
this was complicated to build, a lot of intricate parts.
It's also the first level we sort of started to understand level design on. Like we went a lot of iterations. We couldn't figure out really the core gameplay loop, and this was kind of our petri dish to figure out what's going to really resonate.
And speaking of the mountain, let's chat more about it. I'm curious about how you guys made this seem like a an imposing force in the background at all times, for a lot of the game.
Well, they drew a pretty cool mountain, and we made it in 3D and put it in the background. That sounds simple, but it took a long time to draw a mountain.
The way you say it makes it seem like cool. Like a day later, we were done.
No, I mean this took
That's
probably over a year. I mean, there was lots of different treatments for what the top looked like, and so when you're at the bottom, we had to make sure that that was represented if you're looking up at it. So if you are paying attention in the game and you're down in the lake looking up at the top of the mountain, it has the same peak structure that is up there in the top. We tried to be pretty, realistic about that kind of thing.
We waited a while too. Like we were drawing or building individual sections to try to nail the feel of those things, but it really wasn't until we had to do the cover art that we said, man, we better make sure we know exactly what the mountain looks like from a distance, because we knew all the pieces and we kind of had a very blurrier vision kind of view from E3 2016. But it is funny how you'd think we would start with the wide shot and then move our way in, but we kind of went in the opposite direction.
Yeah, Timo really did an awesome job of making that mountain for the E3 2016 in the skybox, I think. And then Mark Caston, on one of the concept artists, for a while we were trying to add more symbolism to the mountain, so he was trying to like anthropomorphize it, maybe like adding like more of a motif of like a bear or wolf or some kind of more mythological thing, and it started to feel maybe too much like a animated film, like a Brother Bear or something like that. And so yeah, it really wasn't the pack front that it was like, oh yeah, that's what we should make, and that's also what we're going to advertise the game with.
Of all the animated films you could pick, Brother Bear was your example. I like that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Fantastic. Deep cuts.
Yeah, so let's chat about Niflheim as well. Curious about challenges. I know this is very different from what's in the final game, so just curious how it all came to be,
Yeah, these were some really early concepts, and these kind of tapped into, I think, when we were first doing Midgard and even like the high-vis for the game, there was this idea of like these mazes that were made. And so I think, who made that fog maze?
I did it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first prototype idea, we had some new fog tech and some new particle tech and started to play around making a maze that was very foggy, but allowed the silhouette of all the objects to really stand out. And that would play into the mystery. And then we started to layer on a lot of lore with it. And then that there were these plants within the maze, and they were poisonous, and they were the ones that are kind of emanating all the poison, and you can, go around them and get protection from them and everything. So just all layered upon layered to build this unique world. I do really like a lot of the architecture stuff you guys had here that we never really did in the end, but
I mean, there still is sort of some aspects of it, I think, and that like greenish kind of mustardy feel. So
yeah, I like that core concept for me from a design perspective that really started to make it work was when we had talked about it essentially being a world that is filled with a curse. And when you enter into the curse, you start getting damaged and hurt. So when you go there early, you're not able to be protected against that. And it is kind of that feeling of like, all right, I got to kind of armor up and I got to get the right sort of equipment to be able to survive the curse for long enough to be able to go explore this world, which I think that's kind of a cool confluence of things. It's like those early, it's like Wind Waker, when you got to go get the lead boost to go in the cave with the wind, right? And I love that kind of marriage of the mechanics and the things that you get, sort of being able to combat nature, right? Sort of the hero versus environment.
Can you chat a little bit about concept-wise, especially with the coloring? I think, how did the colors stand out, especially with all the realms?
The interpretations of Jotunheim in sort of popular entertainment right now kind of have the classic interpretations of the mountains and the blue and gray stone with the snow cap, very Lord of the Rings, right? But there is a reference in the Eddas that talks about the glittering golden fields of Jotunheim, right? And it's the only reference to that. Most of it still supports this concept of giants living inside of a mountain, which I still like the idea of the interior of the mountain stuff. But I was like, all right, well, I'm going to try to find as many of these sort of obscure references that still give us an anchor in the myth. And I really liked the idea of kind of leaning into that and saying, let's look at this in a slightly different way, right? Let's have a Jotunheim that feels like our own one instead of saying, oh, well, Gandalf could be right around the corner, right? Going with Frodo up the mountain kind of thing. We don't really want that association. We need it to feel like our own. And there's this whole story about the giants and kind of them feeling almost like refugees in the myth. They retreat to Jotunheim and they kind of lock it out and prevent anybody from getting in because Thor and the hammer were super powerful and Odin was kind of a dick. So I think, those things sort of started everybody drawing on these things. But yeah, it went a long time, I think, trying to figure this out and try to make it work. And even in the playtests, we had people going like, this was it. Like when it was early and it was like really like the roughest geometry that we had gotten back. Really not a great looking thing and a really crude lighting pass. People finished the game, right? So it was playtest like last year, early 2017. And they're like, I finished the game and I get to the desert in New Mexico or something like that. And they're like, this sucks. They're very disappointed because it wasn't a lot there. But as everything started to come together, as the art went in, as all the lighting came in, all the effects and everything, people started to really understand that it wasn't that it actually felt like this fantastic, unique ending to their journey.
And I think some of the design, Luke, too, ties into the earlier giant piece where it's the stonemason and you guys did their masters of stonework. So this whole environment was kind of pulled from the carvings and the statues and all that stuff.
Yeah, so a lot of the, I think, larger architecture in Midgard was made by the giants, and then we tell the story of their exodus to Jotunheim in the mural, that's in this space.
Yeah, it does feel like you're, spoilers, you're walking through like a cool museum, like when you walk in there, you're sort of feel small. You see all these cool sculptures, you're walking by, you get to interact with things and hear stories about what's going on, which to me, I think is really interesting that it's like environmental storytelling, perhaps a little heavy handed on it, but like in a neat way, like in a way that I haven't seen too many games do.
Helheim looks colder than Midgard. Curious what artistic touches in-game artistically you guys added to this to make it seem...
I think it's worth noting that the Jotunheim was very yellow. Midgard is very bluish, grayish, Norse, typical Norse, and this is green. We did come up with a big color script, so like Luke and Corey and a couple of us, we review the game plays in this order, and here's the colors you'll hit. So we don't have 3 green levels in a row, or 2 red ones in a row. And so Helheim just naturally slotted into this green thing. It being cold, it just sort of like fit the bill that we'd go sort of greenish, really foggy, kind of cold. Even the final like lighting color correction we did, it's sort of washed out a little bit, so you get that almost cold desert feel to it. Yeah, but green is was sort of from the get-go, like the visual target for this.
It was neat too, because I think we had a bunch of different drawings and somebody just tried one tinted green. And I was like, well, that's really interesting. Because it's very hard to say you're going to the world of hell, basically, within the Norse realm. And obviously their hell is very different from sort of the Greek perception of hell, which then sort of gave way to the Christian perception of hell, as well as this fire and brimstone, right? When you're living up in that climate, hell is actually freezing, right, to death, right? So this idea of making a place that is unrelentingly cold, but also making it feel different from Midgard, which is also pretty damn cold.
Yeah.
And different from Hades in the previous games, which was like black rock and red lava.
Right, yeah.
And so like we came up with the idea to like have this sheared shape type look where you'd have a normal shape and look like someone just kind of cut through it and then offset it a little bit. So it's just not visually pleasing, just looks kind of nightmarish. That was kind of the goal.
Yeah, and then playing up like using some aspects of the mythology of like the river of knives that you're crossing over, or the bridge sort of walk into hell, and the idea of walking through mist for like 7 days to get to hell, and so kind of bringing all those aspects in. And then the gold.
Yeah, like in the myth, it's like the gold roof, but it's like anything we could do to connect with the myth, but also put our own sort of stamp on it so it felt unique. I thought that was great. Like it still maintained this feeling of being part of that world. It's nice that we have the picture of the eagle too, the infamous eagle. The eagle that was part of the early pitches was cut multiple times, brought back in, caused a lot of unrest amongst members of the team and the production staff.
Can you imagine if it wasn't there though?
I cannot. No. I definitely think that the saga of the eagle is a story in and of itself. Honestly, it would make this fantastic sort of narrative journey when you understand how long and hard we fought for it and what it ended up being. Honestly, it's in there and it's like it's not a big boss or anything like that. Even when we got it back in, there was the point where people in the playtest were going, "It's kind of a bummer that I didn't get to fight that awesome giant eagle." And we were like, "Oh man!"
Just wait.
After all the work to get it in, now we got to make it not so visible so it doesn't feel like it dwarfs the guy that you're actually interacting with.
We're just always trying to find ways to combine those two things, characters and environments, and tell the story. I think the eagle is a big part of just even telling that wind blowing and kind of washing out the souls as they walk through the bridge. Like, that's a cool kind of combo with environment and characters that we try to do it everywhere.
Yeah, I think like that's a really good part of this game, which we've touched on in previous games, that I think we're really starting to understand a good methodology of working and how to integrate that is feeling like characters and the world are fused together so that sometimes the characters are not necessarily AI that you're going to interact with. They're a part of the world. They're the storytelling, the environment, the Witch of the Woods house, right? It's just this awesome confluence of all you guys getting together in a room and trying to come up with a clever idea. And then the one that was like, "That's insane, we can't do that." And it was like, "Well, that's the one we're gonna do that."
Challenge accepted.
Yeah, it's just great. Like I think that is one of the best parts of working on these games.
How did the concept of the turtle come about? And the turtle home and maybe the interior as well?
We knew in a conversation I was having, God, this was back when Chris Sutton was here. I had a conversation with him about like, we need to do something interesting. Like, it's cool to have the interior of her house. We got to do something that's unique, right? That makes it feel like, this is a unique house. And I think he said, okay. And he grabbed a bunch of people to go in a room and you guys brainstormed for a while. And when he came out, I think he was thinking about like, oh, okay, well, there's this crazy idea. Then there's a bunch of other ideas. And he's like, I feel pretty good about these ideas. And there was probably a list of like 5 of them. And he was sort of continuing to avoid the conversation of the crazy idea. Because I think he was even saying, I don't know how the fuck we would do it. And I don't think we have the time. And that was around the time when we were constantly talking about scope, which I think was from year 1 to year 4, that we just nonstop every day was scope. But then he mentioned, what if she lived inside a turtle, or at least underneath a turtle? What if there's this big creature, right? And I was like, I love this. He's like, damn it. Because he realized, I think, how hard it was going to be. And everybody, he said, everybody in the room resonated with that idea. Everybody loved that idea. I think everybody recognized it would be really hard to do. But I think that didn't seem to matter because the sort of end result, it's like Brock and Sindri's fucking gratitude, right? That was legitimately not part of anything. Fucking gratitude was not part of the story or anything they did. It was just somebody drew a beast of burden carrying some stuff for Sindri, I think, in one of the concepts for him. And then I was like, oh, we should totally do that. And we don't have time. And then it was just built. Like it was one producer saying, we don't have time, we can't do this. And then it just got built, right?
That's the thing.
Which I remember getting an earful from a producer. What the fuck is this? They just built it when we didn't have time for this.
On some of these things too, you can almost outthink yourself. Like, this is going to be too hard. It's just like, let's put pen to paper, so to say, and just start doing it. And
I think,
solutions start
honestly,
coming.
to me, there's the impractical nature and there's the, yes, like maybe it's too hard, but it's like, it's not practical to have her house below a turtle, right? But it's awesome, right? And it's interesting and it's extremely indicative of the character themselves. I don't know. I like Sanctuary Grove as a whole. Everything in this level is just so beautifully achieved, right?
Well, I think this did a great example of showing that all the mythology isn't evil and against you as well. Like, there's parts of it that are good. And
yeah, it's a nice thing to see, like the God of War game, which is, perhaps traditionally associated with Slayer, death metal, skulls, right? And just fire everywhere, right? To kind of throw a guy like that, like Kratos, with his history in this sort of very colorful world, right? And kind of be the very alien stranger in a strange land. This is like alien experience number 1 Alfheim is kind of like Alien Experience number 2, but this really is that kind of like. I was surprised at how comfortable it felt to have him in this environment, because I really felt like it was going to be so
Because
out
you
of
have
place.
you have the kid as well to be that contrast, right?
Yeah, so
Seeing
he
him
is kind of
interact
like
with
that bridge.
with
I
different-
remember when like this was happening, we were so like the initial pitch for the game was really like, this is the road, but Viking, and there's no like, none of the characters are gonna have any metal, like it's gonna be super grounded. And for me, this was like the first moment when I think we started to fold that new, like the art direction pillars in of like the fantastic. And so this felt like taking the kid to Disneyland, and I was like, wait, there's not supposed to be any joy in this world.
Right.
You know? And then finally, like, I think once we started to like massage those art direction pillars and get this in, it was like, oh, this is exactly what Corey wants. This is like, we need these pockets of like happiness and sort of beauty, and
The world's not
now I'm
always
really
trying
behind
to
it.
kill
But
you.
at first I was like, wait, what is happening?
And we did it in steps too. It felt
Yeah.
like we were doing this. We're like, a little bit more color, a
Yeah,
little bit
yeah.
more color. What if we tried this? What if we tried that? Like, it definitely was not like a single aha. It was like a period of time of everybody kind of saying, what if we tried this? What if we tried that? I think, I don't know. I think that is what sort of makes this moment kind of that standout. Is like, you look at playtest responses, this always seems to rank very high as people's kind of moments of amazing, right? But when the art wasn't in, when it was very crude art, when it was just the design, all we got was just hammered that Kratos is picking flowers. It was just like, really? Flowers? Kratos is picking flowers? This is ridiculous. How far he's fallen, right? Some dude was so pissed at us in the playtest, but then like 3 playtests later, when the lighting and the art finally came in, nobody is saying that, right? Nobody is berating the fact that he's picking flowers. They're more like, this was an amazing sort of revelation, right? And when it all kind of comes together, I don't know. Like, to me, this is the sort of fantastic collaborative end result, right? Where it is like, there is no one person responsible for this. This is literally every single person saying, what if you tried this? What if you tried that? It's even GameSpot is involved in this one, because the name of the freaking turtle is when they named the kid incorrectly.
Oh yeah, that's right. Charlie.
So yeah.
But this did a great thing, I think, throughout the game, of the combination of the characters and the environment working together. I think we created a world that you're interested in. We've got this main story, but to me, I can go off the main story, and I think it would be just as interesting to explore this world, which is trying to create an experience as well as just kind of the game itself.
In terms of character design, anything you guys want to call out that you guys are really proud of from the iterations here?
Vance,
Yep,
right? That
Vance.
did these Vance Kovacs. Man, his first drawings were like right in the pocket of what this character was supposed to be.
Yeah, he has a great ability to just get like strength and beauty at the same time, where sometimes it's really easy to go one way or the other.
Yeah.
And I think this character also kind of goes along with our initial idea that the costuming with all our characters felt like they were handmade. They weren't
Yeah.
super ornate. But I think with this character too, we wanted that connection to nature, and I think Vance also really got that really well. Yeah, even his loose sketches, there's so much gesture and life in them. It's,
Her character's infuriating people who live in cold climates. She doesn't like, nobody wears enough clothes in the game apparently, except they're gods, or they're like local. She's a witch, right? So she's able to make her feet not feel cold. There is a dude called the Iceman who ascended a mountain in his shorts with no shoes, right? So it is humanly possible for an average regular human to survive in these kind of conditions, right? But these are not regular humans. These are mythological figures. So I thought it was cool that her whole thing was, yeah, I don't wear shoes because I have control of the natural forces around me.
I think she was one of the more difficult characters to execute, just because of being a female, and with all the background that goes into females in this game. And also, like, first when we heard the Witch of the Woods, I don't know if you remember, but we had like actual like witch, like old woman.
Yeah.
Creating.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, because
right.
the Revenants were originally called witches.
Rituals, yeah.
And I was definitely like, I didn't really want a witch to be a negative thing, because it's such a heralded sort of like high level position within the mythology. Is like understanding Sather magic is like a big thing. Like, you're really smart. She knows something that very few people know, right? And that even the gods covet something like that. So I think that's cool. Like, for me too, it was really important that she was the same height as Kratos, like to be able to look eye to eye with him. I think that's kind of cool.
So we're at the Draugrs, we're at the enemies of God of War. Could you chat about how many iterations the Draugrs went through? Anything you guys want to call out again here?
I feel like they went on for years.
There was a lot. Basically, we're kind of getting the equivalent of what the Skellies were in the old game. We knew this character would probably be one of our big like multiplicity characters that we see throughout. So exploring what that is. And Corey, again, I think like you were talking about, you didn't want to do the average witch for the previous character. Same thing with this. You kind of push us away from doing like the zombie kind of aspect. So the idea with these characters is their spirits are so fierce that they actually, after they die, they go back and find their body and kind of reanimate it. And in doing so, since it's kind of like an unnatural rebirth, it kind of shatters them. So their weapons and their faces and their features are all broken. But even going with that, I think, Corey, you had the thing that they're not zombies. They don't breathe. They're not living. It's almost a spirit that's kind of driving them.
Yeah. Eric Williams had that idea of saying like they don't have any breath, which in the end, as we started looking at it, it meant like we would say they didn't even talk, like they didn't vocalize at all. But then Niederquell was basically saying that's really hard if we have no sound cues whatsoever. And then everybody realized like, yeah, that's not a good idea. So we need that so that we can actually help you understand if they're near you or on the sides or something like that. So,
and then also what we do here is obviously since this is going to be a big enemy, we need to look at all the variations. So you can see some sketches here by Stephen Oakley on kind of how we propagate one character into like a cast. Another thing that's great about the studio is we're always really hunting for the strong idea. So along with the execution, we always need the strong idea to support it. It's not just if it looks real, if it's successful, it's if the idea works with that. And in doing so, it gets a little rare and rare these days, but we still will do sketching here if it serves getting an idea quickly. So that's one thing in the art book you'll see is the finished 2D paintings, the 3D, but also the sketches as well.
And that was the first character that first enemy that we actually got in the game and working. So he went through a lot of revisions and a lot of different. And we ended up with some of that at the final game, but there was a lot of even playing with the soul idea of not even have like half of the body and half of it is just a soul and how we communicate that idea. So there was a lot of playing with different types of executions, and we ended up with a lot of different enemies for the Draugrs. I think there are like more than 20 of them,
or
different variations. And how we make that work in the game was really challenging as well.
And a nice thing we also do here is we have a lot of collaboration. So a lot of that, as we figured it out, was taking the feedback, but then working between 2D and 3D and making sure that what we designed actually really did hold up in the final game. So it's a lot of evaluation, but that collaboration helps. Elves are always a super interesting character, I think. They're more than humans, but they're not as elevated as gods. So they kind of have this really unique middle space, which I think gives us a lot of creative opportunity. This kind of, what you're looking at here kind of shows like the early inception of them. Some pieces that Yefim did where they were going to be more kind of insect kind of inspired. And then kind of more the final one we went to where they're more humanoid. These are two characters, I think, again, we didn't want like their costuming and their design to just be like man-made. So you see a lot of natural elements in them. This is something that'd be great to kind of, there's a whole story behind these guys, I feel too, that we could revisit potentially.
I think this is one of the first ones when the collaboration really started to kick up a lot with the combat guys and what they wanted to test with these guys. And so we had a lot of early revisions when we got together, and some different designers were choosing the ones that they kind of felt like it would work for what they had in mind. That's why we had a lot of early revisions, even the more insect type of character. But then it kind of evolved, even on the environment side of where they live, and a lot of the more insect vibe early on. But then it kind of evolved into something a little more.
I liked like trying to flip the script on the idea that elves are Orlando Bloom, right? And it's like to be able to look at it and say like, oh, there's inspirations from the sort of traditional understanding of fairies a little bit, as well as then our kind of own take on this idea of both the light elves and the dark elves, so that we could sort of make our own version of it, right?
Yeah.
Instead of feeling like what we're doing is just sort of making pointy-eared guys who, are hunky like Orlando Bloom. And I think we can just with everything that we've done throughout this entire process, it felt like we were always able to kind of approach each one and say, how would we do it, right? Knowing what the sort of popular culture understanding of it is, how would we approach each of these in order to make something unique, so that when people look at this world, they say, oh, that is Santa Monica's Norse, right? That the same way that people look at the Norse world. Some even say, like, this is the way Norse mythology was because it's Thor's universe, right? So they all think Chris Hemsworth is Thor, right? Even though he's red-haired in the actual myth. They all think of him as the blonde, hunky guy with the helmet. So I think it's interesting. Hopefully it will be effective and resonate with people.
Yeah, I think the historical reference as well helped a lot on this one. When we start adding a lot of that stuff, like this has a lot of the tribal influence that we selected early on. That's when I think it kind of starts to resonate with people and make it work. And same thing for the light ones, that it's not in here, but there's a lot of that contrast when they have a lot more ornate designs and the feeling of more.
And everyone's calling them the dark ones and the light ones. And this was very intentional because early on in the project, when talking about things like elves or fairies or dwarves, everybody had a very knee-jerk D&D reaction. So I made a concerted effort to rename things so that people would get more comfortable with the idea, instead of every time I'd say, like, we're going to talk about elves, they'd be like, oh, okay, this God of War, why are we talking about elves, right? So I think it wasn't until, like, what, 2 or 3 years in where it was like, okay, we're going to change the elf or the light one name now back to light elves, because it seems like everyone's comfortable and we don't have to have the D&D discussion, right?
I feel like we had to
over
earn
and
it a
over
little
again. But that's quite funny that we have to almost fool ourselves so that we're comfortable with working in the space, instead of constantly going back to the well of, Lord of the Rings had elves and this is what they look like.
No, but I actually think that really helps because it kind of breaks us out of a character type that has so much history associated with.
Makes you look at it as a unique thing, as opposed to, like, the history and the weight that it carries, right? That everybody's like, oh, it's elves and fairies. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, and one thing we did too with this character, and the light one is kind of the counter to the dark ones, even though they're opposing. On first look, we wanted them to feel very drastically, but on second look, you might realize that there's actually some similarities between them, just kind of that they're from the same realm and they do share some kind of history.
They are two sides of the same coin, like they are intrinsically tied together. And just like different human beings wanting to fight each other, they are the same, and yet they have conflict.
So looking at the Revenant, just curious about the story behind the design with the lantern, the hay, all the elements that go into it.
I think this one was really like make something different and unique that feels like it's not the witch that you've seen before in different games. So it was a lot of sketching by Yefim again.
Yeah.
Of just trying to come up with something that feels unique. I feel a lot like Bloodborne also came out like right at the time when we started designing.
Yeah, that was frustrating as hell. Because honestly, this came. The initial thing with the rake came from an etching that I saw about, sort of medieval Europe when they talked about the plague. They called it pestilence or pesta, right? And they had it was personified as this like scary old woman with a rake that would come into your village and essentially kill everybody with her breath, right? And it was the way that they sort of made the Black Plague kind of physical. Right. And I thought, oh, that's really cool. This concept of pestilence, this old woman with a rake. And the rake, I just kept kind of going back to and feeling like that's so interesting because it's so innocuous. It's like a piece of like yard equipment. Right. But it has a kind of sinister vein to it. So she took forever to get right. Like this was something we went back and forth on for quite a long time. Even the upper right hand corner, is that the drummer?
Yeah.
Cut character of the drummer.
Or the witch or the revenants at the beginning had more variations within them.
So they were having like potentially like that drum vibe.
Yeah. And I think that was even coming kind of like from combat, of almost like you couldn't see her, you almost had to follow the sound of the drum.
Yeah.
It was a real cool idea, but sometimes things don't work ultimately for what we need. But
what was the lantern? Did we put the lantern on because we wanted her to be seen easier from a distance? Or was that just like a random sort of art choice that it was like, we just put a lantern on there?
I think it came from the design or one of the first sketches when it just feels the silhouette reads much better with the lantern. And when we started playing with the variations, that was something that we kept through all of them.
Yeah, and I think another thing we kind of try and do too is we want to make these characters frightening, but avoid going into like the horror side of it. It's kind of like a fine line, but it's very easy to go on that. And I think, you know, what Yefim did with this is really kind of hit what we were looking for, where it's a scary character without being kind of the cliche horror witch.
Yes, cliche horror, bad.
For these Valkyrie artwork, I'm just really curious about the inspiration, especially it seems like fallen heroes, fallen like soldiers almost. What were some of the inspirational designs that you guys took?
These are done by Justin Sweet and Vance Kovacs, and this is actually one of my more favorite characters in the game. I really love what they did. Again, inspiration came from Corey. I think, again, kind of playing against type, you had the idea about the harness as the wings, not going with the natural set of wings.
So that it's more like a plane captain getting their wings. Like it was a sort of a graduation. Like you become the shield maiden, the strong warrior, and what you get out of that is the physical wings as kind of like your mark of being a Valkyrie.
Yeah, kind of almost. Yeah, I think one time we were talking about maybe like Odin gifted it to him, or was it very special for them to get it? And
it's a little like the blades, right? So Odin gives it to him, and it feels like a gift, but honestly, it's more of a sign of servitude.
Yeah, no, Vance and Justin did these great things where they're almost wearing these death masks, and within those, we kind of tried to theme each of them after a different animal, so each one had their own unique design. And I think what came from the wings and the harness also to complement this was a unique gameplay. And what we do with the gameplay is, one, they've got the wings to attack, which is really unique in our character cast. But secondly, where Kratos has the Bifrost and is able to kind of go through realms a little bit, he's kind of learning that magic where these Valkyries have a mastery of it. So even when you attack them, they can kind of almost pull weapons out of different realms. So you may not see them with a sai or a blade, but they'll have it right there. It's like their attacks can switch really fast, which is super unique. And
yeah, even that we started add a lot of the Bifrost energy and how things act in the universe and pulling stuff from different realms. So all the effects and all that stuff kind of plays up on the same vibe. And the same thing with
helmets
the
were
wings.
kind of a breakthrough moment.
Yeah.
Like the first one that was done, and we were like, oh my gosh, that's cool. And starting to theme them after kind of the cardinal animal of each of the Valkyries. I was like, oh, that to me was like that awakening moment of like, oh, I can really see how these will work. Because all the drawings were really cool, but it's hard to make a Valkyrie that feels like our own.
Yeah.
Because they're so widely understood, and kind of the tenets of what a Valkyrie is are hard to take away. You can't really strip those things away. So you end up having a difficult time distinguishing yourself. But I think we did a pretty good job of that.
That's one thing I like about the mask too, is it takes away the emotion in the face. That's why, like, again, this was like frightening versus horror. That's why sharks are scary to me. You can never tell what they're thinking. It's
Because
just
they wear
like,
masks?
yes, Valkyrie masks. And that's my character concept mind.
You're like, I'm going to pitch that game next. Sharks that wear masks.
That character was also cut, the shark with the mask. But next game.
It's interesting too, because, you know, as you find out when you play through the game, you understand the connection of Odin to the Valkyrie. And part of those helmets, while they are ornate and they kind of disguise, they also sort of dehumanize, if you will.
Yep.
They take away who the person is underneath, which is kind of, you know, very beneficial for Odin. That's something Odin would want, is to turn them into kind of his soldiers.
Any emotions, characteristics that you feel successfully translated in your artwork here?
This was another one, kind of take on a classic Norse creature, the trolls. We knew early on we kind of wanted to do like variations, like we have a fire and an ice, a stone troll, and kind of trying to reflect that in this race. One thing I did like, again, is giving the layers to the character. So even in the first E3 trailer in 2016, he's coming at Kratos, and you can even hear him speaking. So you can tell they've got their background of their own languages, and so that even we don't understand, but it kind of adds to the character that way. One thing we did is we imagined, like, in this world, there'd be these kind of like monolithic structures that have power. And that's actually what the trolls are using as their weapons. So they've kind of picked those up in the world, so that kind of boosts their kind of natural elemental abilities and is like a core of how they
It was a
attack.
very unfortunate gameplay loss. There were some really cool ideas around those markers, that they would be present in the world and you would use them. And then if you saw one and it was still sort of there, solid, and no troll had appeared, like, oh, you're like, okay, and then you see another one, you sort of get comfortable, and all of a sudden a troll appears and snaps it off
Yeah.
and uses it against you. I thought that was kind of neat, and we ended up not really being able to keep it in the scope of the game, but the using it as a weapon still, I think, made it unique for this character.
Well, I think you can even see little hints of that, because as you look at these pillars that they have, the offerings that we imagine people would put at them before they were picked up are still on there, and it's actually what the trolls used to hold them.
Yeah.
Even when you find them in the game, you can see that their reaction's a little like almost like a religion to the totem. So you see them praying to them, and that stuff always helps bring into the character. Also in the design, a lot of the stuff that when we can see them using on his shoulder, so you see energy almost taking over some of his skin, and the reaction to the weapon also on their body. I think it's something that we played on a lot on their designs. And you brought up them being more intelligent, and even on the costuming for these guys, we kind of went a little over on the handmade stuff as they would make stuff for them.
Oh yeah,
and try to sell the scale with that stuff.
and each one was kind of like their own little hoarders, right? Like someone collects stones, others.
Oh yeah, and like skulls and stuff like that.
Yeah, each one had their own thing that they kind of hoarded.
And
Well, I like
all-
that fact that like trolls have their own culture.
Yeah.
And that each sort of, I guess, race of trolls, the stone trolls, the ice trolls, and the fire trolls, like they truly had like villages. They had sort of a structured government. They had an alliance with the Aesir gods and sort of a peace with the Vanir gods. And then they were kind of screwed over by everybody, and they ended up wandering the world sort of stateless, right? That the last few that remained before they got double crossed by the gods, like kind of wandered around in this sort of angry Ronin state.
Or the discussions about how you guys came to the final designs of the dragons.
Yeah, this was another early design. I think we knew we wanted dragons. It was one thing we showed in the first E3 trailer. Here are some sketches by Steven, some pieces by Justin Sweet. And the idea was that this dragon lived in the mountains, so we were kind of pulling a lot from that. It's thinking like his skin is paler now that he hasn't, or she hasn't been outside, and the idea that it's almost like a double mouth, and it can kind of inhale, and maybe it uses that for burrowing in the mountain, as well as being like a cool attack in the game. So we try to also make sure that the designs work with what we need for the gameplay mechanics.
Even the cave that you mentioned, that him living inside the cave, the wings was part of it. That like since he grew up in there, he kind of didn't develop the wings like the other dragons.
Yeah, just the way you look at real life, how certain animals start to kind of lose limbs and things that they aren't using and stuff, and the pigmentation kind of.
This basically proves that
disappears.
it's really fucking hard to make a dragon that doesn't just look like every other dragon.
Yeah.
This took forever, and every time we were looking at it going like, okay, but it pretty much looks like you could just step off the pages of a Skyrim art book, right? And we, love that game. It's great, but we should make something that feels unique to our world. And that's super hard with dragons, because so many dragons have been drawn over the years.
Well, that's why I said, like, making that a design looks real isn't the metric for success here. I think we've been in a ton of meeting courts too, where you've been like, this looks great, but we need to still push it.
Right.
And that's like a blessing, but it also is hard work.
Focusing on the weapons, just overall, like what were some of kind of the core values or foundations that you guys were starting with in building these weapons?
Well, for me, it was that the blades are such a part of Kratos, just like the character. So making this new weapon, the axe, was a big deal. Trying to make something that could kind of carry that same weight. And at the first E3, I remember being at E3 with the team, and people responded really well to it, and that was kind of like a sigh of relief. I think that has some nice things. Again, this is one of the things we tried to bring the Norse elements. I think Yefim did a first pass where he had like a skill tree across the axe. So you bring these elements, and then as it progresses, we kind of really kind of push the visual drama on it to really kind of make it stand out. And I love at this studio that they're willing to let us explore things that are small, as like an axe design or an arrow design, even something on the arrows, like how do we make this feel Norse? Maybe it's like braided down the stem or something. And I think it's an example of strong concept design. If you can hold something up and say, hey, this works perfectly in God of War, but if you take it out, it doesn't work, because all the things that we're pulling from are from the story and the world.
Yeah, and then axe itself was a big challenge, just for the gameplay wise as well, like being able to customize it and change it and swap parts and all that. That was a big challenge as well, and make that in a way that it works with the design, because it was. We also, like we mentioned with Kratos in the trails, like for the axe, we also had narrative behind it. There was a lot of cool little things that we could add on, like the ice trolls influences, and if you look at the handle of like if the head of the axe, it has a lot of ice troll influences and design on the head of the axe, and that makes it that much more special instead of just doing like some Norse patterns. I think every time we try to bring the narrative into the designs, I think it helps solidify the idea.
Yeah, 'cause that's a part I think it's easy in games not to really get that narrative part. You know, it's easy to say, hey, we just need a brawler or like a ranged guy. And part of the history of the axe that Corey had was that ice troll, but it also had belonged to the mother. So you can see in the last upgrade of the axe, it almost has a falcon look to the tip of the blade, and then the bottom pommel of it as well. Like that's all inspired from the narrative stuff that Corey and the team gave us.
Yeah, it's interesting because we don't go too heavily into a lot of that stuff, but it's nice to have these influences there to know that everything has a sort of grounded purpose within the world. Like it's all being built, from very sort of specific histories, as opposed to kind of just the random. I think you could really tell when you look at some games where it's just like everybody randomly throwing a bunch of stuff together in a pot, whereas something I think throughout all of God of War's history, you can kind of look at all of the art and really see that central concept that kind of breathes or sort of tendrils out to all these different aspects, and all of them feel like they're part of the same world, as opposed to the sort of randomized feel.
And I think audience these days are really smart. Like you said, they're dissecting this stuff and really picking up, and I think that layering they can really kind of tell.
And
It's funny, this is like the weapons page, and we got Kratos' hands on here. He's like Chuck Norris, man. His
Those are the
fucking
biggest
hands are a
weapons on
weapon, right? Or is this is that to show off the different scars he's got from the chains? Is that what the drawings were meant for?
Yeah, kind of. Obviously, the history, we don't have the blades, but we still want to recall that they're still there. That's part of who he was.
Yeah.
Those scars will never go away. And then I think a big narrative thing too was he was trying to kind of keep that past.
Well, they
from
also
his
don't
son.
stop bleeding.
Yeah.
Like since he left Greece, they were sort of the wounds that never healed, right? And then throughout the game, he's kind of, like you said, hiding it, trying to sort of pretend his history didn't exist. But that never works out well for people.
Yeah, he can't get away, even though he's trying. It's still kind of part of him.
Everybody, thank you guys so much for your time. Thank you to Dark Horse. Thank you to our VizDev team. And thank you guys for listening to this whole commentary.
Thank you to our entire art team.
And our art team.
Yeah,
Thank you to our
it was a
entire
group
art
effort.
team. And
in production for working with us.
Yes,
And allowing us to endlessly
putting up with the
perfect. Yeah.
craziness. Honestly, it's thank you to every single person on this team and every significant other who has suffered through the insane schedule that we've had throughout all of this. We love you all, and we thank you. Hopefully, it shall be worth it.